Skeleton Crew premieres next week with its first 2 episodes, and I'm going to give you guys all of the characters I think could appear or maybe be referenced throughout the show. This, as always, is just pure speculation. It's not based really on anything other than my understanding of the Star Wars timeline and my knowledge of the characters who are still alive and around and possibly could fit the narrative of this show. Before we get started, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel for more. We're going to cover Skeleton Crew completely with live streams after every single episode and, of course, predictions videos every single week. So if you're interested in the Skeleton Crew show, make sure you don't miss it. Subscribe to Star Wars Lads. And without further ado, let's just get into the list. For those of you who don't know, Skeleton Crew is set during the same Mandalorian kind of TV and future cinematic universe part of the New Republic timeline. And because it is set in that part of the timeline, it's pretty obvious that some of the most likely characters that could appear in this show are, of course, Din Djarin and Grogu. When we last see Din Djarin at the end of The Mandalorian Season 3, he has settled down on Navarro with Grogu with plans for hunting down Imperials and reviving his career as a bounty hunter. Since this show will involve a lot of pirates and some of the Underworld, it is a possibility that we see a Din Djarin on a bounty hunt at some point during the show. And of course, wherever Din Djarin goes, Grogu soon follows. Also picking up off of Mandalorian Season 3, we do have the confirmation that some of the lead villains of the show are going to be from the pirate nation of Gorian Shard, as you see in The Mandalorian Season 3. Even though Gorian Shard is killed in the skirmish above Navarro, we do know his second in command, the pirate Vane, is going to be in the show, and that also leads to a high likelihood that a lot of the different pirates we see from Gorian Shard's pirate nation do make their way into this show. The other 2 shows that are featured in the Mandalorian TV universe are, of course, the Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka. Out of these 2 shows' leads, Boba Fett and Fennec Shand are much more likely to make an appearance, considering they are part of the Underworld element of Star Wars, and the fact that last time we saw Ahsoka in Season 1 of her show, she and Sabine Wren are stuck in another galaxy on the planet Peridia, and I don't think they will show up in this show regardless of their ability to, unless for some reason Skeleton Crew takes place prior to the events of Ahsoka. That does leave room, though, for more characters from shows like Ahsoka, like a Hera Syndulla and a Jason Syndulla, as well as Chopper. Hera has been one of the most active members of the New Republic military, and from the trailers we do know that X-Wings will make an appearance, so there will be some type of New Republic element in this show. It is possible that if for any reason this show does lead to us meeting some higher-ups in the New Republic, Hera would be the most likely candidate for us to see. As for Ezra Bridger, we don't know where he is going to be at the time of this show. We last see him having a reunion with Hera, and I would assume he stays right around her side, but that doesn't mean he's not off doing his own thing with his own Jedi mission that probably doesn't connect to the Underworld, or at least this show. But when we talk about X-Wings and the New Republic, especially in Star Wars Canon TV, you've got to mention one of the recurring characters, Carson Teva. And seeing X-Wings in this trailer, and knowing that Carson Teva has been one of the most active X-Wing pilots in this part of the timeline, I would not be surprised at all to get an appearance from the famed X-Wing pilot. And if we get Carson Teva, that could also mean an appearance from the rest of the Adelphi Rangers, including Lieutenant Reed, Dave Filoni's character Trapper Wolf, Sash Ketter, Jib Dodger, and though not confirmed to be a part of this unit itself, maybe Zeb Aurelios, as we know Teva and Zeb have a friendly connection as seen in The Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 5, which did feature the pirates that will be the main villains of this show. There's also the Navarro element of The Mandalorian, which certainly is up for debate in the future. Considering the passing of Carl Weathers, it's unlikely we get any more appearances of the character of Greef Karga, who was High Magistrate of Navarro in The Mandalorian Season 3, but we do know the new Marshal of Navarro is now IG-11, and if any action does occur on Navarro, IG-11 is a solid bet to appear in the show. And speaking of IG-11, it wouldn't be surprising if the beings who fixed him up, the Anzellans, also appeared in the show. Maybe not the ones that are stationed on Navarro, but we do know Babu Frick, who is the most famous Anzellan from Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, has some shady dealings with the Underground on Kijimi. If Kijimi were to appear in the show, it's a good bet we see Babu Frick. Then of course you have the Mandalorians themselves. To me, that doesn't make much sense for them to appear in this show, but of course the 2 most likely candidates, because they're the most famous, are Bo-Katan and the armor, but again, I don't really see that happening for either character. Now, what about the Imperial side of the Mandalorian universe? When we look at the Imperial side, the first person you have to think of course, is Grand Admiral Thrawn, who has just reappeared above Dathomir at the end of Ahsoka Season 1, and then right alongside him are characters like Brendol Hux of the Shadow Council and eventually the First Order, or Gilad Pellaeon, who's also a member of the Shadow Council, both Imperials who could make appearances in the show. There's also the question of if Moff Gideon did survive Mandalorian Season 3, or if the one that died was a clone. I personally don't think Moff Gideon is done, but I would be shocked if Skeleton Crew is the place he reappears. One of the more likely Imperial characters that I think could appear in the show is Elia Kane. Kane appeared in The Mandalorian Season 2 and 3, but was given a much more extended role in The Mandalorian Season 3, serving as an Imperial spy for Moff Gideon. With her being a spy, maybe she does infiltrate the Underworld and tries to gain some Underworld allies for Thrawn, as we see him do in Heir to the Empire. As for Thrawn himself, I don't really see him appearing in this show. If they want to make Skeleton Crew a very connected show, one that does actually have much more importance to the Mandalorian story than we initially thought, then I could see him showing up for about 5 seconds to deliver one line or on a hologram, but I don't think the show will be given the same high level of interconnectivity that we saw in Boba Fett and Ahsoka and The Mandalorian. Now let's look at the other most notable faction that has roots in this show, and that is the Star Wars Underworld. Pirates specifically are one of the most dominant things featured in the promotional material, and of course there is no more famous pirate in all of Star Wars than the great Hondo Ohnaka. Hondo is alive during this period of Star Wars, and he has been featured in live action before. And no, you didn't miss something. It hasn't been in a TV show or a film. It actually is in pre-show material for the Star Wars Smuggler's Run ride in Disneyland and Disney World. There is both an animatronic of Hondo, but also an actor in full makeup and prosthetics playing the character right before you board the Millennium Falcon. I'm not saying that that actor is going to reprise the role of Hondo, but they did have Jim Cummings voice over Hondo's voice over that actor's performance, and they could very easily do the same thing here in live action TV. And speaking of Galaxy's Edge, where Hondo has been making most of his sequel era appearances, it does bring up one other prominent Underworld character from the planet Batuu, where Galaxy's Edge is set, that could appear in this show. That being the Ithorian character Doc Ondar, who you can see in full animatronic glory in Doc Ondar's Den of Antiquities in Galaxy's Edge. Ondar is a collector of rare antiquities and often deals with the black market. If there was a show to first give us an appearance of Batuu, I think Skeleton Crew could be a good bet to do so. Going back to Hondo though, we know he had many notorious associates in Star Wars Rebels, where we last saw him before the events of Skeleton Crew. One of the more fun members of Hondo's band of misfits is the Ugnaught Melch. Hondo and Melch also have direct association with one of the recurring Underworld villains of Star Wars Rebels, as Morrigan. If they did want to give a full nod to something from Rebels, as Morrigan is another character who could possibly appear. On a more famous side though, when you talk about the Underworld, you have to of course mention Han Solo, Lando Calrissian, and Chewbacca. I personally don't see any of these characters appearing in the show. At best, Chewbacca, because he wouldn't need to be recast, and the Mandalorian shows have so far refused to recast any of the original trilogy characters, opting for deepfake CGI versions of Luke Skywalker. So if we did get Han Solo and Lando, it would be interesting if they went with Alden Ehrenreich and Donald Glover, or they decided to deepfake these characters like they did with Luke. The promotional material for Skeleton Crew has very prominently featured loads of Star Wars aliens and creatures, which then of course made me go back to two of my favorite sources of background characters, Jabba's Palace, and of course the original Cantina in Mos Eisley, Chalmers Spaceport Cantina, as reference points for characters and designs they could bring into the show. Again, these characters would be very unlikely to be name dropped and would most likely just be Easter eggs or novelties, but some of the characters from the Cantina who could make appearances are Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba, both of whom have made appearances in Disney Star Wars, as they appeared in Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. There's Arleel Skoas, Athelo, Boelo, Bom Vimden, Boshik, Braconner Bakiska, the Tonica sisters, Brea and Seni Tonica, or their imposters as we originally see in Chalmers Spaceport Cantina, with Shada Dukal and Carolee Doolin. Owen and Chachi Damal, Cobb Sanbepol, Damino Demali, Danik Jericho, Dans Borland, Deb Noli, Dice Ibagon, Jas Pur, Illis Hellrots, Feltapern Trebog, Fikrin in the modal nodes, Garuf Lafu, Gela Yeens, Him Dazon, Hennik Kane, Het Nikik, one of the Jawas, Rikchek Kalfas, Jenny Habe, Hardusai Malik, Ketwool, Kiddik Keed Kak, Lax Servak, Lisub Sirin, Malus, Merk Sunlet, Miyum Onith, Moma Nadan, Mosip Benid, Muftak, Mio, Nabrin Leeds, Nish, Onelko, Hans Limbic, Regesk, Bront Burnlu, Rykar Ryjerd, Saitor Kalfas, Swila Kori, Takil, Pos Ka, Trinto Duwaba, Tizvt, Weoslea, Wooher, Yurka Mig, and Zutton. Then looking at something like Jabba's Palace, there's always Saelt Marae, or Yakface, Ifant Mon, who was also a villain in the Legends Republic comics, Malakili the Rancor Keeper, Amanaman, Droopy McCool, Cy Snoodles, and Max Rebo from the Max Rebo Band, and of course Joe Yowza. Other bounty hunters could be involved in this show. The classic Empire Strikes Back bounty hunters like IG-88, Bosk, Zuckuss, and 4LOM, one of the most famous bounty hunters from the expanded Star Wars canon material, and someone who did appear in Star Wars Legends, Bylert Valance. And then there's also Jaz Imari from Star Wars Aftermath and her crew, amongst whom does feature the bounty hunters Embo and Dengar. Looking at The Mandalorian as well, you also have the first live-action appearance of Kersantin. With this being a more family-oriented, kid-friendly show, I do kind of expect some more of the funny, goofy characters to appear, and one of the ones I absolutely think would fit the vibe of this perfectly would be Dexter Jetster. We don't know what Dex has been doing post Attack of the Clones. I would love it if he were a part of this show. Another character I think would fit the more kid-friendly vibe of the show very, very well would be Maz Kanata. A lot of the pirate characters in Star Wars canon have associations with Maz Kanata in some form, and it wouldn't be surprising at all to get an appearance from Maz's castle on Takodana. One of Maz's longtime associates that could be involved as well is the infamous Therm Scissor Punch from Solo: A Star Wars Story. And of course, another one of the more infamous pirate characters we meet in the background of Maz's castle in The Force Awakens is Sidon Ithano, aka the Crimson Corsair, who leads a pirate crew featuring the characters of Quiggled, Reveth, Squeaky, Pintawale, Reeg Bronze, and the clone trooper Kix. Looking at The Force Awakens particularly, it does leave open multiple different factions of pirates and underworld gangs that could show up here. I think particularly about Kanji Club from The Force Awakens, as well as the Guavian Death Gang. We can also look at pre-Return of the Jedi and slightly post-Return of the Jedi notorious factions. Recently with the game Star Wars Outlaws, and then a lot of the comics we've been getting over the last few years that have taken place between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, we know that prominent crime groups like the Ashiga Clan, the Hutt Cartel, and the Pike Syndicate dominated the galaxy's underworld shortly before this time. I'd be shocked to see Kira's return to live action in this show, but with Emilia Clarke reprising the role for the first time since Solo in the game, maybe it is alluding to the fact that we do get more Kira and maybe an appearance in Skeleton Crew. Another syndicate I would like to see make a return is Black Sun, and then we briefly got a look at what the Hutts were doing at this time in the Book of Boba Fett. I wanted to see more of the twins, and maybe they will appear in this show, and I would love to see what the Hutts are doing post Return of the Jedi and post the loss of Jabba to try to reclaim their stranglehold over crime across the galaxy. And I mentioned Outlaws multiple times here, and this could be a place to bring in live action Kay Vess and Nix. The character of Kay Vess would fit the vibe of this show, but with Outlaws getting a lot of major changes in free updates, and of course 2 DLC packs coming soon, one of which just came out or is coming out depending on when you watch this video, it wouldn't be shocking to have some type of corporate synergy between both the video games and the TV shows by having Kay make a quick appearance in this show. And then I also look at a couple Legends characters, and these ones are long shots for sure, but it could be fun if they made an appearance. One notable character who was obviously very active in this time and is very important to the Thrawn storyline is Talon Card. We have yet to have Talon Card brought into Star Wars canon, and maybe a show like Skeleton Crew could at least reference Talon Card at some point. And if you bring in Talon Card, why not bring in Mara Jade? And another underworld faction from Legends I'd like to bring up is the Locke Revenants. The Locke Revenants, or Locke Resistance, were a group of pirates operating out of the Carthax system before, during, and after the Clone Wars, and they were led by the pirate captain, Nim. And another Underworld character from Star Wars Legends that I'd like to mention would be the Devaronian Vilmar Grark, one of the more fun recurring characters in the Star Wars Republic comics. After that, we have to look at the other two factions that are very prominent at this time, and that's the New Republic and the Empire. I already mentioned a lot of the New Republic characters in the Mandalorian part of this video, but there are some other ones who could appear, even if they're much more unlikely, so I won't spend too much time on this section. The obvious ones are Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa. We have seen Luke Skywalker appear in 2 different Star Wars shows in this part of the timeline. Out of these 2 characters, I think Luke is the more likely, considering Jod is supposedly a Jedi. I think there's going to be some type of twist to that, but I don't see somebody as high-ranking in New Republic politics as Leia appearing in this show whatsoever. And then, of course, there's Ben Solo. When you have the OT characters, you have to also mention C-3PO, who has been there in Ahsoka, speaking on behalf of Princess Leia, and then, of course, R2-D2, who is with Luke. And if we do go more into New Republic politics, there is Admiral Akbar, Mon Mothma, and if you wanted to canonize Borsk Phalia, you could do that here as well. Other New Republic characters and fighters that could appear in the show, maybe a Nien Nunb or a Wedge Antilles, although again, both are very unlikely. And on the Imperial side, I do want to mention some Legends characters who do have a possibility of showing up here. We know at this point the Empire seems to be filled with warlords and people trying to claim parts of space for themselves. There's been no indication that the Empire is actually involved in this story whatsoever, and if they are, I don't see them playing a major role. But if you wanted to go with the warlord angle, you could always go for one of the most famous warlords in Star Wars Legends, Warlord Zinj. Zinj is one of the main villains of the X-Wing series, most notably the Wraith Squadron trilogy, and he also is one of the villains of Courtship of Princess Leia. So he would make sense and would be somebody who's kind of an Imperial outsider that could still work even if he weren't part of Thrawn's plans and Thrawn's side of the Empire. You could also go with a couple of other Legends characters like Isan Izard or Natasi Dalla if you wanted to introduce some more Imperials to the story, but their appearances wouldn't necessarily make as much sense. So there you have it. Those are the characters I think have a possibility of at least showing up or being referenced in some capacity in the show Skeleton Crew. Let me know if I missed anyone in the comments below. Make sure you like the video if you haven't. Subscribe for more content just like this. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you all next time.